It's funny, isn't it? How we just throw around the word intelligence like it's nothing. Someone cracks a good joke, they've got street smarts, maybe they solve a Rubik's Cube in seconds, suddenly they're intelligent. But it really makes you wonder, what are we actually talking about when we say someone is intelligent? And, with this stack of academic papers on intelligence you've given us, theories, history, measurements, it seems like that's exactly what we're going to be diving into today.
Yeah, it's really quite fascinating how our understanding of intelligence has changed over time. Like, for the longest time, everyone was so focused on trying to define it as this single measurable thing.
So like trying to condense it all down to a single IQ score.
Exactly. In the very beginning, researchers like Galton were really into measuring things like sensory discrimination. They thought the sharper your senses, how well you could tell the difference between weights or different sounds, the sharper your mind must be.
I mean, it makes sense, right? At least on a very basic level. It's like the more input your brain can process, the smarter you must be.
That was the thought. But it didn't take long for everyone to realize that intelligence is way more complicated than that. It really wasn't until Binet and Simon came along that things really started to shift. They were trying to figure out which students needed extra help in school, and their work actually led to the development of the IQ test as we know it.
Okay, so let's talk about this whole IQ test origin story for a second. They were the ones who came up with this idea of mental age, right?
Exactly. They realized that kids' cognitive abilities, they naturally develop as they grow older. So they started designing these tests that would figure out a child's mental age, which they could then compare to the kid's actual age to kind of get an idea of their cognitive abilities. And that comparison, well, that's how the intelligence quotient, or, IQ, was born.
So like, if you have a 10-year-old who just aces a test, designs for 12-year-olds, that means they have a higher mental age than their actual age,
Yeah.
a higher IQ, which basically means they're developing faster than their peers, right?
Exactly. This whole approach was revolutionary because it shifted everything. We went from focusing on these very basic sensory skills to looking at way more complex mental processes. And that's where Spearman enters the scene with his, well, it was groundbreaking at the time, but also controversial concept of the G factor.
The G factor, right, short for general intelligence. Wasn't that like the idea that there's this kind of underlying, I don't know, mental horsepower that influences how we learn and problem solve across the board?
That's the heart of it. Spearman noticed this pattern where people who did really well on one type of cognitive test, they usually did well on others too. It didn't really matter what the subject was. It was like there was this common factor, this G factor that was influencing things.
So someone who's like amazing at learning new languages, they're probably also going to be pretty good at picking up a new musical instrument or maybe learning how to code.
Exactly. And this was really just the beginning. This discovery, it set off a wave of new research into how intelligence is structured. And of course, not everyone agreed with Spearman's conclusions.
Wait, hold on. Are we saying there were some serious G factor skeptics out there?
Oh, tons, like Thorndike, for example. He wasn't sold on this whole general intelligence thing at all. He was much more focused on how important specific skills were, rather than this big overarching G. And then there was Thurstone, who had this completely different approach. He proposed this theory of 7 primary mental abilities, things like verbal comprehension, numerical ability, and spatial visualization, just to name a few.
So it seems like we're starting to move away from this idea of intelligence as a single score and towards this much more, well, multifaceted view. Like there are all these different ways to be intelligent.
Exactly. And this is where things start to get even more interesting.
So before we get too far, you were saying that there's even more to this whole intelligence thing than just multiple types of intelligence. I've got to admit, you got me curious.
Well, there are researchers, Das, Naglieri, and Kirby, and they came up with this model called the PASS theory of intelligence. And it's interesting because it focuses on how our brains actually process information. So it's suggesting that intelligence isn't just about what we know, but about how we think.
Okay, PASS theory. I think I've heard of that, but could you remind me what PASS stands for again?
Yeah, so PASS stands for planning, attention, simultaneous, and successive. And these are the 4 cognitive processes at the heart of their theory.
Okay, so 4 different processes, each with its own special role in how our brain understands the world, right? I'm guessing these processes all work together when we are, like, trying to solve a problem or learn something new?
Exactly. They're like these different gears all working together to power our cognitive abilities. Maybe we should break down each process.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's start with planning. What does that actually look like in action?
Okay, well, imagine like A chess player, right? Someone who's strategizing moves in advance, trying to anticipate what their opponent's going to do. Well, that's planning in a nutshell. It's about setting goals, coming up with a strategy, and then being able to adjust that strategy on the fly as needed.
So it's like you have your mental map, but you've also got to be prepared for detours and roadblocks along the way, right? Yeah. Okay, what about attention? I mean, that one seems kind of self-explanatory, but how does the past theory approach it?
Well, it's a bit more nuanced than just being able to focus. It's really about this ability to filter out distractions and just hone in on whatever's most important in that moment. Like, think about everything happening around you right now, all the sounds, maybe some visual distractions, but you're still able to just focus on what we're talking about and process what we're saying.
Oh, that's meta. It's like our brains are these finely tuned radios picking up the right frequency amidst all this noise. All right, so we've covered planning and attention that leaves simultaneous and successive processing. Those two always kind of trip me up. What do they involve?
Okay, so simultaneous processing is about seeing the big picture, putting it all together. Like, when you're working on a jigsaw puzzle and you've got to be able to see how all the different pieces fit together to make the whole image, that's simultaneous processing at work.
So that connecting the dots kind of ability, seeing the patterns, the relationships. So if simultaneous processing is the jigsaw puzzle master, would it be fair to say that successive processing is more about thinking in a linear way?
You got it. With successive processing, it's all about taking things step by step. Think about following a recipe, or maybe learning a new dance routine, even understanding grammar in a sentence. It's that very methodical, sequential way of processing information.
Okay, interesting. So it's not just about having a high IQ, it's also about knowing which of these processes are your strengths and which ones might need a little more support, right? So I have to ask, what's the practical application of all this? How does understanding these processes actually help us?
Well, that's actually what makes the past theory so relevant, particularly in education. It's given educators this whole new way of understanding why a student might be struggling with a certain task. And then they can use that knowledge to tailor their teaching methods in a way that supports the processes that might need a little more focus.
Like a personalized instruction manual, but for your brain, right?
Well, yeah.
This is so cool. We're really seeing how understanding the nuances of intelligence, all these different cognitive processes, can actually help empower people to learn more effectively.
Precisely. And when we're talking about these different approaches to understanding intelligence, we can't forget about researchers like Guilford, Gardner, and Sternberg, who each offered these unique perspectives that really broadened our view of intelligence.
Yes. Okay, tell me everything. Guilford, his model was, if I'm remembering correctly, incredibly ambitious in scale. He really went for it.
Absolutely. His structure-of-intellect model, or SOI model, it actually proposed a mind-blowing 150 different intellectual abilities, and he had them all organized along these three dimensions: content, operations, and products. It's a pretty complex model, and to be honest, not all of those 150 abilities have really been backed up by research, but it's still hugely significant because it really expanded our concept of intelligence beyond what it had been.
Wow, 150 abilities. That's a lot to unpack, even for a deep dive. What's so fascinating to me about Guilford's work is that he really pushed the field to move beyond that one-dimensional G-factor concept towards this much richer, multifaceted understanding of intelligence. I mean, it makes his work, even with its controversies, incredibly important. But then there's Gardner. His theory has practically become a household name, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, it really captured the public's imagination. You're right. He argued that these traditional IQ tests, they were way too narrow in their focus, that they completely missed all these other amazing ways in which people can be intelligent.
Yeah, he really blew the lid off of what intelligence could look like. I think everyone remembers where they were when they first heard about things like musical intelligence or bodily kinesthetic intelligence. It was revolutionary.
Right. It completely changed the game. It made us rethink how we measure intelligence and how we nurture those different forms of intelligence, because suddenly we realized that you could be a brilliant dancer, have this incredible musical ability, or be amazing at connecting with people. All of these were equally valid forms of intelligence, even if they didn't show up on an IQ test.
Makes you wonder, How many people were told they weren't smart enough, only to find out later they had these incredible talents and abilities that no one ever even noticed or encouraged?
I know, right? It's a question a lot of people have probably asked themselves over the years. And while Gardner's theory has been incredibly impactful, we do have to acknowledge that some of his proposed intelligences, like for instance spiritual intelligence, haven't really held up to scientific scrutiny as well as, say, logical mathematical intelligence has.
It's like this blend of art and science, right? Trying to take something as nuanced and individual as creativity or interpersonal skills and find a way to measure it scientifically. It's tricky. We still have so much to learn.
You're telling me, but that's part of what makes this field so exciting, right? There's always something new to discover. Speaking of different perspectives, we have Sternberg. He proposed a model that really spoke to me personally.
Oh, yeah, Sternberg. He's the one with the triarchic theory, right? So we're talking analytical intelligence, creative intelligence, and practical intelligence. Like a balanced breakfast for the brain.
I love that. And just like a balanced breakfast gets you going for the day, Sternberg believed that all three of these aspects of intelligence are crucial for success in life.
And just like with breakfast, I think most of us probably find ourselves drawn to one or two types of intelligence over the others, don't you think? But I do want to hear more about how these three intelligences differ from one another and how they work together. I'm guessing that's a conversation for after a quick break. We'll be right back. Okay, so before the break, we were talking about Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence, this whole idea that intelligence is really about finding a balance between your analytical, creative, and practical abilities. Did I get that right?
Exactly. Sternberg really emphasized that if we want to truly understand intelligence, we can't just focus on analytical skills, the kind of intelligence that those traditional IQ tests usually measure.
Right, so analytical intelligence, that's all about being able to look at information, analyze it, solve problems logically.
Gotcha.
But what about the other two, creative and practical intelligence? What do those look like when you see them in action?
Well, creative intelligence is really about generating new ideas, coming at problems from these completely new angles. Think about artists, inventors, entrepreneurs, they're all tapping into that creative intelligence.
So it's like this ability to think outside the box, you know, to come up with innovative solutions to tricky problems, which actually makes me think creative intelligence has got to be even more important these days, right? Especially with how fast the world's changing.
You're absolutely right. As the world gets more complex, more unpredictable, being able to adapt, innovate, come up with new solutions to new problems, those skills are only becoming more valuable.
Totally. Okay, so we've got analytical intelligence. That's our ability to analyze and problem solve. Then there's creative intelligence, which is all about bringing these fresh perspectives, new ideas to the table, which leaves us with practical intelligence. What's that all about?
Practical intelligence is interesting because it's all about how you actually apply your knowledge and skills in real-world situations. It's that ability to be adaptable, to read people, to navigate all those different social situations we find ourselves in.
So if analytical intelligence is more like your classic book smarts and creative intelligence is about thinking outside the box, would you say practical intelligence is more like, I don't know, street smarts?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's about knowing how to take what you know and use it effectively to actually get things done out there in the real world. And Sternberg's big point was that all three of these intelligences, analytical, creative, and practical, they're all important ingredients for success in life.
There's that old saying, it's not what you know, is who you know. But in this case, it sounds more like it's not just what you know, it's how you use what you know and how you use it to connect with other people that really makes the difference.
100%. And what I love about Sternberg's theory is that it really pushes us to value this wider range of skills and abilities because, maybe someone isn't acing every test in a traditional school setting, but they really shine when it comes to creative problem solving or understanding how to handle these complex social interactions.
It's a good reminder that intelligence can look a lot of different ways. And it kind of makes you wonder, how different would our schools be, our workplaces, even our relationships, if we really, truly embraced and encouraged all these different ways of being intelligent?
It's a great question, and it brings us back to what this whole deep dive on intelligence has been about. That intelligence is so much more complex, so much more nuanced and fascinating than we often realize.
Totally. We started out talking about this idea of intelligence as a single measurable thing, that G
Mhm.
factor. And here we are, exploring all these different cognitive processes, abilities, and even these totally different types of intelligence. It just goes to show you how much our understanding of intelligence has evolved.
And it makes you realize just how much more there is to discover about the human mind, too. What we talked about today is just scratching the surface when it comes to understanding how intelligence works.
It really makes you wonder, what other series, what incredible breakthroughs are still out there waiting to be uncovered? What an awesome time to be exploring these big questions about intelligence.
Absolutely. And for those of you listening, if today's deep dive has piqued your curiosity, don't stop here. I encourage you to check out the source material we've been discussing, really dive into these theories, think about your own strengths, and maybe even challenge yourself to look at what it means to be intelligent in a new light.
It's been a fascinating deep dive today, and we hope you'll join us next time for another exciting exploration.